Shalom, shalom. Welcome to Tekhilat HaDavar, Basics of the Word. This is Torah HaMashiach, the Torah of Messiah. And tonight we are going to look at Mishpat Olam. This is our last installment of the study of the Basics of the Word. And as soon as 7 o'clock gets here, we will start. I just wanted to do a sound check, video check, technology check, make sure everything's okay. Looks like we are. I'm going to step out and get a beverage, and I'll be right back. Shalom, shalom. Shalom, shalom. Hello, Sharon. Hello, Teresa. So far, you're all we got. Okay. Mishahusham. Shalom, shalom. Got a few more minutes. I'll let people keep logging in here. I'm just getting organized. Shalom, shalom. Hello, Carolyn. Jeanette. All right, just a couple more minutes. Hopefully you guys can speed through the first quiet minutes. And those of you that are just now logging in, of course, you don't know that unless you just intuitively did that. Hey, Joe, glad to see you. It's easy to forget what day it is, especially when things are so different. Shalom, Leslie. Shalom, shalom.
Deborah's got a migraine.
Oh, yeah.
And they got bad weather. And that Jimmy's already had to put one fire out.
Yeah. It's not quite Shabbat yet, Daniel. But shalom. It is almost Shabbat. Okay. So we are going to, hopefully we're going to finish the last installment of the Tekhilat HaDavar, the basics of the word. And so as usual, we're going to start in our anchor scripture over in Ivrim chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, let us leave the basics of Davar HaMashiach and let us go on to perfection. Or do you again lay foundations other than these? Teshuvah from dead works, or from works of death. Emunah in Elohim, the doctrines of Tekhilat, Smichat Hayad, Tekuma Miben Hametim, and Mishpat Olam. And of course, you should, if you've watched all the videos, you should have the interpretations of all of those. Tonight's is Mishpat Olam, and that's eternal judgment. And that is a big topic. I think it's a hotly debated topic. There's a lot of different opinions about it. But what we're gonna try to do is glean from the scriptures what we can, and maybe just a little bit of ancient Jewish custom to try to figure out what eternal judgment is. And I think all of us kind of know the meaning behind it, the purpose of it. We have general concepts about it, but there's a lot. Like I said, there's a lot of varying opinion about it. When it happens, what happens, who does what, that kind of thing. We're going to try to look into all of that tonight. So I'm going to start by reading in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27, where it says, and just as it is appointed for men to die once, and after their death the judgment, so Mashiach was once offered to bear the sins of many. And so I just wanted to read that verse because it's important to understand that this is Shaul writing, and the way that he's writing to these Jewish people, it's as if they understand that every man dies one time, and after their death, then the judgment happens. So that is the order. Of course, in religious circles, a lot of people go around judging people all the time before anybody dies. So that's the first thing I want to put on the table, is that everybody has a chance to rectify their condition in the judgment up until their last breath. And sort of another implication of that scripture is that it seems to imply that every man is going to die, and after that, every man is going to be judged, and that is the case. And you're going to see that in some other scriptures where it's very explicit that no one escapes the judgment. Everyone passes through the judgment somehow, and we're going to talk about that. So that's in Brit Hadashah. And so, as in everything I've told you before, I'm sort of an origins guy. I like to go back to the beginning. I like to know the source of things. So where in the Old Testament is the judgment, since that's what we are talking about, eternal judgment? Where is that specifically mentioned? And so, surprisingly, there's not a lot of places. It's not, for such an important event, there's not just a whole lot of places that specifically talk about the judgment, not in open terms like that anyway. But the place I want to start is in Daniel. We're going to go to chapter 7 first. And what I want you to remember is that the book of Daniel was very, very popular in the time of Messiah. It was, Yeshua quoted the book of Daniel many times. I think it was alluded to or hinted at. The season was, the messianic overtones of the day were hot because of the prophecy of Daniel. And if I'm not mistaken, it was just this past Shabbat where we detailed the timeline from Daniel to Messiah and showed you exactly how pinpoint accurate that prophecy was in regard to Yeshua showing up. So, and the book of Daniel mentions the judgment probably more clearly than anybody, especially, I think he kind of gives us the imagery of the judgment probably better than anyone. So starting in about, let's see, we'll start in verse 9. Daniel chapter 7, verse 9. And I beheld till thrones were placed, and one that was Atik Yamim did sit. His raiment was white as white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, and the wheels thereof burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. And so you can see very clearly that this is talking about judgment. And so one thing to take away from it is that there's books involved in this process. And if you are if you think in images like I do, then you can see that this is a courtroom scene, and there is a judge on the throne, and he's very imposing, and then the next thing that I want to take away from it is that books are involved, and that comes up later in another scripture that we're going to look at. So now we're going to go on down to 12, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. And if I'm not mistaken, we also talked about this on Shabbat. And at that time, shall Michael stand up, the great prince who stands for the children of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in HaSefer. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to Chayei Olam, and some to reproaches and everlasting abhorrence. And I think we might have talked about that a little bit last week. So because last week we talked about Tikumami Ben Hamitim, resurrection from the dead, and as other basics of the faith were tied together, so are these two. Resurrection of the dead and eternal judgment seem to be tied together. And so what you're seeing in Daniel chapter 12 is that it kind of fits along with what we read in the book of Hebrews in chapter 9. Many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. So it is appointed for man once to die, and after his death, the judgment. That's what you're seeing here. Many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to Chayei Olam, eternal life, and some to reproaches and everlasting abhorrence. So it looks like there are one of two places that are determined by the judgment as to where a person might spend his eternity. So I hope you're kind of making notes of those things. So the first thing that we have is a person dies and then he is judged. There will be books at the judgment, and someone is seated on the throne, and he is going to do the judging. And then the judgment, according to Daniel 12:2, is happening after the resurrection. And so that kind of skews things a little bit from most people's common interpretation or common understanding, sort of the colloquial understanding of the judgment. They think you stand before the throne, and then you get determined as to whether or not you rise from the dead, or so on and so forth. I think the scriptures bear out that it's quite the opposite. You rise from the dead at one time or another, and so you are judged at one time or another, and your eternity is settled based on what's already happened, not on any. In other words, it's already decided before you rise from the dead as to what your judgment is. It's just handed down to you. You get to hear it. So that's kind of similar to human judicious procedures, or jurisprudence, legal procedures here on earth, but slightly different because you don't have the element of resurrection in it. But the main thing to keep in mind is that we're going to this is tied around the resurrection, which we talked about last week. So where else in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, might we learn of judgment? The first place is going to look in the Psalms. Give me just a second here. So in Tekhilat chapter 9, I should say Tekhilat 9, since those really aren't chapters. Let's see. We'll start in verse 8. But Yeshua is enthroned forever. He has established his throne for judgment, and that kind of harkens back to Daniel's words about the judgment of the throne was there. Thrones were set in place. We might talk about those other thrones. There is more than one. Thrones were set, and so he has established his throne for judgment. That's the purpose of his throne. And he will judge the world in righteousness. He will minister judgment to the peoples with equity. He will also be a high tower for the oppressed, a high tower in times of trouble. Okay, so the main thing to take away is that Yahweh is the judge, and he is sitting on his throne, and that's the purpose of his throne. Okay, again, these are very scant references to judgment, but they are references nonetheless. I'm trying to watch for any comments, so if you have questions or comments, I'm trying a new arrangement of my screens here tonight, so just bear with me. So Joe says, yeah, I believe the courtroom visual is valid as Hasatan accuses us, yet Yeshua intercedes for us. Yeah, so I agree with that, and you can see that since you brought that up. Let's go to Eov, and we'll come back to Psalms. Eov is Job. And we'll start in chapter 1. That's where we'll read. And we'll start in verse 6. So this kind of goes to Joe's statement that Hasatan accuses us. And he's getting that from a verse over in the Brit Hadashah. It's either in Yaakov or Yochanan. I can't remember. One of the two, where it says that the accuser stands to accuse us daily. You can see that this might be another place where that is played out. But the only reason that I didn't think to go here concerning judgment is because this is not the final judgment. This is sort of maybe the arraignment procedures, the accusation. The crimes are being presented before God, and they're being presented by the prosecuting attorney, which in this case is our enemy Hasatan. So it says in verse 6, now it fell upon a day that the B'nai Elohim, and that phrase is probably, it is a very common phrase in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, for what most people know as messengers or angels. Literally, that means the sons of God. But that's one of the terms that is used for the messengers. They came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Hasatan came also among them. Hasatan is the adversary. And Yahweh said unto Hasatan, from where do you come? Then Hasatan answered Yahweh and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. It's important to note that this is after the flood. Eov is a contemporary book with the book of Genesis. The best estimation is that he lived probably in the time of Shem, or thereabouts, before or maybe between Shem and Abraham. So it's a very ancient story, and I just wanted to make sure that you understood that this is happening in the era of time that we now live in, and it's not pre-world stuff. It's not some kind of first creation or anything like that. You have probably heard some of those things. Then Hasatan answered Yahweh and said, from going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. And Yahweh said unto Hasatan, have you considered my servant Eov, that there is none like him in the earth, a pure and an upright man, one that fears Elohim and shuns evil? Then Hasatan answered Yahweh and said, does Eov fear Elohim for nothing? Have you not made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions are increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has. Surely he will blaspheme you to your face. And so you see, this goes on. This is not the topic for tonight, but it kind of goes along with what Joe was saying. So Hasatan is standing in front of Elohim, accusing the righteous one, Eov, and trying to get legal access to him. And of course, God grants it to a certain degree, actually to a great degree. So that backs up what Joe said there. So let's go back to Tekhilat chapter, or Tekhilat 37. All right, this is a very, very vague reference, but I do believe that it references the judgment. Starting in verse 11. Let's start in verse 10. No, let's start in verse 9. Okay, yeah. For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait for Yahweh, they shall inherit the earth. You're going to see that Yeshua's words in the Beatitudes, he likely drew from, I believe he drew a lot of his words from the Mishlim, from the parables that a lot of people just didn't understand. They shall inherit the earth, and yet a little while, and there will be no more wicked. Yes, you shall look well at his place, and he will not exist. But the humble shall inherit the earth. There you go, the meek, the humble. And delight themselves in the abundance of shalom. The wicked plots against HaTzadik. We saw that in the book of Eov, and gnashes at him with his teeth. Adonai does laugh at him, for he sees that his day is coming. The wicked have drawn out the sword and have bent their bow to cast down the poor and needy, to slay such as are upright in HaDavar. HaDavar is the way. It's the people who walk the Torah. Their sword shall enter into their own heart, and their bows shall be broken. Okay, so we've kind of gone past. It's a very vague reference. Verse 13 is the one that I really want you to key in on. Adonai does laugh at him, at Hasatan, at the wicked man as well, for he sees that his day is coming. Now, in the English, we could have interpreted that his day either way. Obviously, I do think that it's talking about the wicked, his day is coming, but you could have easily said the day of Yahweh, because that's the judgment day. A lot of people think that the day of the Lord is Sunday, but the day of the Lord in Hebrew is Yom Yahweh, and it is a particular day on the Jewish calendar, and it is the day of judgment. So that phrase could have bent either way in that sentence. Let's go to Psalm 50. I'm going to start in verse 1. I wasn't going to, but I'm going to go ahead and do it, because this is going to come up later. And Mizmor for Asaph. God, Elohim, Yahweh, has spoken and called the earth from the rising of the sun to the going down thereof. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, Elohim has shined forth. Remember how he's described when he's sitting on his throne. Our Elohim comes and does not keep silence. A fire devours before him, and round about him it storms mightily. That's similar to the imagery in Daniel. He calls to the heavens above and to the earth, that he may judge his people. And this is what he calls out. Gather my chassidim together unto me, those that have made a brit with me by sacrifice. And the heavens declare his righteousness, for Elohim, he is judge. Selah. So that's very clear there. The word gather, I'm not looking at it in the Hebrew, but Asaph is the name of, the common understanding is the name of the person who wrote this psalm. And so there's a handful, I can't remember exactly how many, I don't know, 10 to 20 psalms that are by a guy named Asaph, we think. But Asaph also means one who gathers, or a gatherer, one who brings people together. And so you see that same word. I'm just going to call it up in the Hebrew if I can do that right quick. If y'all don't mind. Let's see, what's the best place to do this? Okay, we're in Tekhilat 50, right?
Mhm.
Almost there. My computer is slow tonight. Okay, Tekhilat 50. Verse 5. Yes. I'm going to paste. Let's see. First, I'm going to paste Asaph in our message board. And that has a lamed in front of it. Le Asaph, the first letter reading from right to left, is a lamed. The three letters of the name Asaph are the next. Aleph, Samech, Fe, Sofit. Okay, and now I want you to look at the word for gather. And this is the plural imperative of gather. It's that same word in the plural, asfu. Okay, so it's basically, so gather my chasidim. And the point of that is that the gathering of the people of God has been going on for ages and millennia. And so that's where a lot of people misunderstand some of the scriptures from the Tanakh, is they have a bad interpretation of what it means when someone is gathered. Okay, so here you see, gather my chasidim together unto me, those that have made a brit with me by sacrifice. And of course, the sacrifice is the one you could say. I'm going to go ahead and paste that in our board there. I used to write it on the whiteboard. I get to do it a little quicker here. There's Isfu. I didn't actually hit enter. Okay. They have made a brit with me by slaughter, you could say, instead of sacrifice. Zavah is the word there, and that actually means to slaughter. And of course, Yeshua was slaughtered for our sakes. So, and that's how we make a covenant with Elohim. Formerly, it was done with animals, looking forward to the final sacrifice of Yeshua. But to enter into covenant with God, ultimately, it's in Messiah, Yeshua. Okay, so he calls to the heavens and to the earth that he may judge his people. So this is an allusion to the resurrection, which has to, like we've already talked about, that has to precede the judgment. Okay. So that's another affirmation of that concept there. All right. Where else in the Tanakh might we directly talk about judgment? As I said, there's not very many places that openly talk about it. It's kind of has to be studied out. But we're going to go to Qohelet, which is Ecclesiastes. We're going to start talking about who the judge is. We kind of have already been doing that. In one verse it said Elohim, in another verse it said Yahweh. Both of those are correct because it's one entity. Verse 17 of Qohelet, Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says, I said in my heart, HaTzadik and the wicked, one Elohim will judge. For there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. Okay? So and if you're familiar with this book, you understand that Qohelet, which is Shlomo, Qohelet means congregational leader, and so at the end of the book, you find out he's been standing in the place of Messiah. It's a very messianic book. And so in this chapter, he starts, it's the famous time to be born, a time to die. There's a time for every season, every purpose under heaven. And the whole book is talking about the futility of life and all of man's pursuits and how ridiculous they are. And we basically forget that we're going to be judged. And so this verse is reminding us that all of mankind is going to be judged, like we've already talked about. and it's a duality. It's binary. There's no gray area in judgment. It's either or. Okay. And so HaTzadik is the one who is made just, and one who is righteous. Okay. And of course, we believe and teach that one can only be made righteous by trust in the blood that Yeshua shed for all of mankind. That blood was shed for all of mankind, but only a handful actually trust in it. And so that is what makes one step out of the sort of the destiny of the wicked and into the destiny of the righteous, is by trust in the blood of Yeshua. That's what makes one just before God, just in the sense of having his record expunged, having all his debt to society, and the society that we're talking about is God's society, his kingdom, his rule, having that debt of infraction against it wiped away, and that can only be done by trust in the blood of Messiah. So it's a dichotomy. It's a binary. It's either one or the other. There is no purgatory. There's no in-between place. Your destiny is set by the time you die. And Elohim is the judge of who that is. And I'm probably gonna hammer on that, because a lot of times we as humans don't realize that we're actually judging other people. And what does that mean? That means assuming in our hearts that they're going to hell because they're doing certain behaviors that the Bible says not to do, so they must be going to hell. You don't know that. You don't know that God hasn't got a righteous gem inside of that person, and he just hasn't peeled away the junk yet. So it's very dangerous to stand in his seat. That seat of judgment is his. And I try to teach that, but it's very difficult to get humans to believe it and to act on that. Okay, so Qohelet chapters 3 through 5, really, if you read all of that, we're not going to take the time here to do that. But if you read those 3 chapters, you kind of start seeing some of the ideas behind judgment. But we just don't have time to do that. So I'm going to go to chapter 11 now. Let's start in verse 6. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening withhold not your hand, for you know not which shall prosper, whether this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. And the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. For if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, and remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, Elohim will bring you into judgment. Therefore, remove vexation from your heart and put away evil from your flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. So basically he's saying, yeah, you can do whatever you want, but you got to remember, everything you do is going to be weighed in the balance. So we're starting to get into the sort of the mindset behind it. The judgment, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I don't like to come across as trying to be scary to people, but it's a terrifying thing. Over in the book of Ivrim, chapter 10, it tells us it is a dreadful, horrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And that means if you don't take care of your infractions against his kingdom, then you are in a pickle, and it's an eternal pickle. That's the problem. So judgment is final and eternal, and this light time, this brief time that we spend on earth, to frolic and make light of it and not consider judgment is a very, very foolish thing to do. And for us who live in the day that we live in, when the signs of the times seem to be stacking up on us ever more quickly, it's a foolish thing not to think about the impending judgment of God that is coming on this earth. So let me see what our comment is here. Yes, Joe. And so, yeah, there's a couple of words that you can use to mean similar things, and they tend to get blended together. Judgment in the sense of condemning someone as an act of judgment, not just in judging in the sense of weighing someone's actions and determining whether or not we want to hang around them. So it is proper to weigh people's actions and say, I can't be around that person because of thus and so. But where we cross the line is when we ourselves sit in the seat of judgment, where the verdict is handed down, the condemnation is handed down for what we perceive to be evil. And it may actually be evil. And the point that I was trying to make is that we don't know the sum of that person's whole life before God. We don't know their confession. It's entirely possible for someone who is a believer in Messiah to have a series of sins going on in their life, and God is eternal and knows the final end of that person, and we don't. So that's kind of the point that I was making. And the problem with people, especially in my view, people who begin to follow the Torah and lose sight of that. They lose sight from the height from which they have fallen. They lose sight of the fact that they are not God's judge. I had recently someone tell me, someone that I didn't reach out to this person. That person reached out to me, not knowing what was going on in our life, and I just basically made a light comment about it and how painful it was. And that person said, yeah, that's the problem with Messianic people. They get a little educated and they get judgy. And judgy in the sense of condemning, exactly. And that's what you said. Judge doesn't always mean condemn. You're precisely right. So it's good to point out that division. Let's see, where were we? 11. Okay, let's go to 12. Qohelet chapter 12, verse. Let me see where I want to start. We'll just go ahead and go. I want to go to. Let's start in verse 9. And besides that, Qohelet was wise, and hopefully I can spell this right. I'm typing it. From memory. I think that's the word kahal, okay? And that's where the word Qohelet comes from. Kahal is congregation, okay? So Qohelet it's really kind of, it means congregation leader, the one who sort of governs this thing, the one who, you guys still with me? I got that weird message from Facebook again. Give me a thumbs up if you're with me. Hello? It says I'm still going, but I've got a little error, so it'd be nice to get some feedback that you're still here. Bueller? Okay, good. Thanks, John. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, explaining Qohelet. Okay, so Qohelet is a congregational leader. So I'm pointing that out because this is a key verse that some of you who know me, you've been taught before. But it's one to put in your tackle box. And I'll explain it as I read these verses. I'm going to start in verse 9. And besides that, Qohelet, the congregation leader, was wise. He also taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out. And this is Shlomo, who is the wisest man ever to live, obviously apart from Yeshua, but in his day certainly, and probably since other than Yeshua, the wisest to ever live. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many mishalim, that's proverbs. Okay? And I told you, I believe that a lot of what Yeshua preached from and taught from were the proverbs. Okay, Qohelet sought to find out words of delight and that which was written uprightly, even words of truth. Now, pay attention to this. The words of the wise are as goads. As nails well fastened are those that are composed in collections. They are given from one shepherd. And furthermore, my son, be admonished. Of the making of many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all having been heard, fear Elohim and keep his mitzvot, for this is the whole man. For Elohim shall bring every work into the judgment concerning every hidden thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. So that's an excellent way to end a book about the vanity of life, is you better remember that you're going to be judged. Not smart to forget that. So let's see, I've got a comment or a question. Okay. Okay, that's a good question. Perhaps not at this moment, Daniel says, but how do we determine if we are officially saved? I have trouble relaxing into that trust by Yeshua's grace I am saved versus our works to grow closer to him. So it is a balancing act, in one sense, but in another sense, it's absolute. So we are being saved. We are in the process of salvation. As long as we remain faithful to him, as long as we are moving toward Elohim in some fashion, we're saved. As long as we constantly remind, and I posted it in our congregational website today. I went up and played a song about the blood of Messiah because I've been contemplating that a lot, because I sometimes I lose sight of the fact that my shalom is found in his blood, in my confession of the fact that he shed his blood for me. And that is a powerful element. And I believe that's why Elohim used blood to invoke that imagery of the punishment of Yeshua, and how he basically was drained of his blood in a slow and agonizing way, by being torn open with whips, beaten, his beard pulled out, so he was bleeding, and then he had to walk bleeding all the way up that hill, and then they caused him to bleed some more. They put those big, huge nails in his wrists and in his feet, and he hung there basically after that. And if you know anything about that method of execution, it's death by asphyxiation. It's a very slow asphyxiation, which means you suffer to death. You smother to death. You run out of oxygen. And so blood is life, and life is breath. And so blood provides the oxygen that you're taking into your lungs to your body. Well, not only has he lost that sort of carrier of oxygen to the rest of his body, but now he's hanging there like this, and he's having to pull himself up in order to open up his lungs so that he can breathe. So it's an agonizing death, and it was all predicated on the fact that his blood was draining from his body. And I got a little bit graphic because it was a graphic thing that Yeshua did for us. And that right there is the one thing that is your anchor. And if you firmly believe that Yeshua shed his blood because of everything that you did wrong, you got to remember, he did that before any of us knew it, before any of us were even a blink in our Father's eyes. Yeshua died on the tree for us. And that's a lot of people have trouble understanding that it's what he did, even though it happened 2,000 years ago, what he did was outside of time. And so, and I say it often, go back to that tree, put your face down at the feet of that tree, and I'm not asking people to form things in their imagination. If that helps you, I suppose that's okay, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's the confession of it. It's the, and I'm getting in, and we say it every week in our rites. That's one reason that I do like the rites that we have in Messianic Judaism, is we say it in our Siddur every week at Erev Shabbat. We take the standard Jewish method of blessing the wine. Blessed are you, O Yahweh, our Elohim, King of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. And then we follow it up with another one just like it, who gave us the blood of Yeshua HaMashiach. Okay? And so it is we are redeemed by that cup of his blood, the confession that he shed his blood for us. And so if you can say that, if you absolutely believe that, and you can say it, then say it every single day. And if you have to, multiple times a day. I sang about it today just because I'm so enjoying the peace that I've had over the last few days, since about Friday, probably, the peace that I've had just from ruminating on that fact that it doesn't hinge on what I do. It doesn't hinge, things that I've done since I came to trust in Messiah that were erroneous. They were errors. They were sins. They were, they were things that I shouldn't have done and ways that I shouldn't have thought, And I'm well aware of those. Especially me. I remember everything, and it's a curse at times. I remember everything, but the problem is I remember everything that I did, and it weighs me down sometimes. But if you can trust that He died, that there is enough of His blood to wash away every person's sins, then you can have the shalom. And if you continue to do that until you take your last breath, then you're safe in the judgment. And so in regard to the works that we do the works not to get closer to Him. We get closer to Him by the sacrifice. We enter into covenant by sacrifice, and that sacrifice is Yeshua's blood. Okay? We do the works because we love Him, because it's the right thing to do. It's what He wants us to do. It's what the works that we do in the sense of keeping the Sabbath and putting on tzitziot and keeping all the feasts and doing these menial things that are very easy to do. All these things are easy to do. We don't do them because they save us. We do them in order to provoke people to look at God, because that's the image that God wanted us to portray to the world. Okay, so Joe says, I visualize breaking Torah as whipping him once more. It's agonizing to think He did that for me, yet I let Him down through sin. Absolutely. It's heartbreaking to know that He took more lashes. And the thing is and we are a little bit off topic, and I kind of knew it would go that way. I just got derailed.
He took lashes.
Yeah, the thing is I think we talked about it a little bit last week, that not only did He suffer on the tree, but He suffered after that. And that's the part I believe where it took care of the majority, because I believe that all of that stuff that He suffered in His body was for our physical healing, and then the suffering that He did in His soul was for everything else. That's me personally. It does say in Yeshayahu 53, by His stripes we were healed. And so that the stripes is what I'm talking about. That's what tore Him up and caused most of His bloodshed. Okay. All right. So let me figure out where we were. Yeah. So we were in Qohelet 12, and I wanted you to understand this. The words of the wise are as goads. All right. I'm just giving you a little nugget here. So I believe it's in Maaseh, which is Acts chapter 9, I want to say, where Shaul comes to Messiah. You all know the story. Yeshua comes to him. He falls down. He's blind. The light, or he's not blind yet, but the light is bright. His soldiers that are with him fall down. They see light, but they don't see what he sees. They can't hear what he hears. Yeshua speaks to him, and the first thing He says to him is, why do you kick against the goads? And you have to remember that Shaul, Paul, is a scholar of the Torah. He's a PhD in Hebrew writings, and he knows this verse, and it's one of the few places where the word goads is used in Scripture. And there is no doubt in my mind that when he said, why do you kick against the goads, that he was talking about the words of the wise are as goads. He was talking about the Word of God. And as nails well fastened are those that are composed in collection. That's all of the Scriptures. They are given from one shepherd. And of course, that shepherd was standing there talking to Shaul. So Yeshua was telling him, you're fighting the Torah. Here is a man who thought he knew the Torah inside and out, and he's telling him, you're fighting it. You're fighting my word. Okay, and you learn from the rest of Shaul's teaching that that's the truth. Okay, so and so ultimately this shepherd is the judge. Elohim shall bring every work into the judgment concerning every hidden thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. Okay. Let's see. Now I want to go to Shemot. That's Exodus. Chapter 33. I'm sorry, 32. You remember over in the book of Daniel, that he said the throne was set, God was sitting on his throne, the books were opened. Okay? There are multiple books, and we're going to try to talk about that. I think we're going to run out of time. We may have to do this for one more week. But in Shemot chapter 32, verse 31, no, let's start in 30. This is after Moshe came back. If I'm not mistaken, I'm going to try to set context a little bit. This is after Moshe came down from the mountain, and the people were found in sin, and it was grievous. And Moshe throws the stones, the tablets at them. 3,000 people die. Okay. If I'm not mistaken, that's the context here. And in verse 30 it says, "And it came to pass on the morrow that Moshe said unto the people, You have sinned a great sin, and now I will go up unto Yahweh. Perhaps I shall make atonement for your sin." That's an important word in regard to judgment. We're going to talk about that here in a bit. "And Moshe returned unto Yahweh and said, Oh, this people have sinned a great sin and have made them a god of gold." So that tells me that my context was right. "Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, and if not, blot me," this is Moshe speaking, "blot me, I pray, out of your book which you have written." So the thing that I wanted to point out is that the book that he's talking about is already written. Okay? And this goes back to the idea that even though we are confined by time, God is not. And he knows the end from the beginning. His book is already written. He's giving man an opportunity to change the books. Okay? But they've already been written. And we'll talk about that more here in a little bit. "And Yahweh said unto Moshe, Whoever has sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book." There you go. So, and I've tried to teach this, and it's hard to get people to understand, and the overarching thought sort of outweighs it, and people just don't want to accept something different. But the book of life, that's what you're talking about right there. The book of life has already been written, and every human name is in it. Every last human name of every human that will ever live. It's like a roll call of humanity from Adam to whoever the last person is, which is ridiculous. It's a huge book. It's already been written. And so whoever sins against me, him will I blot out of my book. It's already been written. Your name gets blotted out. Okay, and we're going to talk about this in more detail a little bit later when we talk about the Jewish customs that relate to the Judgment Day. But I just wanted you to see that the books are there, even over in Shemot. And of course, over in the Tekhilat, you see that play out. And we read some of that last week, so I'm not going to revisit that. So our last definite place where the Tanakh, the Old Testament, talks about judgment openly is in Yoel, which is Joel. Now, I can't tell who's here because of the stuff's going on in my feed. The book of Yoel is one of the places in the Old Testament where the verses are numbered differently. So I'm reading from Yoel chapter 4. If you have a version other than HaDavar or a version other than a Jewish Tanakh, then you're likely going to be off. And I can't help you. I don't remember what verses these are. I want to say they're probably the latter part of chapter 3 in a King James and other traditional Christian translated Bibles. But I'm starting in Yoel chapter 4, verse 1. "For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring back the captivity of Yehudah and Jerusalem, I will gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Yehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and divided my land." So one of the reasons that Elohim judges the earth is because of what they do to Israel. And so that is why I pay so much close attention to what is going on in Israel. Okay? This shows you that Elohim is the judge, and it shows you a place of judgment. And so we talked about that judgment at that place, even though it didn't last week, the scripture we read, it didn't say that place in particular, but this is telling you where that judgment actually happens. Okay? So those are the very direct references to judgment. It's not all of them in all likelihood. It's not all of the references to judgment in the Tanakh, but it's the major ones, and honestly, it's probably the more, certainly the more prevalent ones we read, like Daniel 7 and Daniel 12, and maybe Ecclesiastes, and certainly Shemot. But Yoel chapter 4, there's another place that is in the Tanakh that is related to one of these that we'll come back to, but I don't want to go there yet. But we've pretty much covered that. So, however, there are allusions to the judgment in other scriptures in the Tanakh. And they start getting us into sort of these concepts that are in Jewish rites and rituals from 2,000 years ago. Those things tend to reveal more to us about judgment. And you see those things sort of packaged up really neatly over in the book of Revelation. And if you don't know that, the book of Revelation is all about judgment. And it's all about eternal judgment. So, and we are going to touch into that. Like I said, that might be a good segue into our next topic, because it looks like there's more demand for prophecy than there is for anything else right now. Gee, I wonder why. But that might be a good segue, is to start looking at the judgment from the perspective of the Tekhilat, because that, again, that whole book is about that. But over in the Tanakh, in Vayikra chapter, we'll start in 16. And it's interesting to me that we just came through these scriptures in our reading of the portions. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. As a matter of fact, I'm probably not going to read it all, except for maybe I'll start in verse 16. So I'm in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 16, verse 16. And he shall make atonement for HaKodesh, that's the holy place, because of the uncleanness of Bnei Yisrael, and because of their transgressions, even all their sins. And so shall he do for the Ohel Moed, that's the tent, that dwells with them in the midst of their uncleanness. And there shall be no man in the Ohel Moed when he goes in to make atonement in HaKodesh until he comes out. All right. There's another place. Yeah. So let's go down to verse 29. And it shall be a statute forever unto you in the 7th Chodesh, on the 10th day of the Chodesh, you shall afflict your souls, and shall do no manner of work, the homeborn or the stranger that sojourns among you. For on this day shall atonement be made for you, to cleanse you from all your sins. You will be clean before Yahweh. So this is Yom Kippur. All right. And so we're going, like I said, we're going to start getting into the sort of the Jewish nature of, I guess, the Jewish customs and overtones of judgment in the customs. Okay, and so it's wrapped around Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur is a day of atonement. Kippur comes from the word kapar, which means to atone. And so Yom Kippur is the day of atonement, and that is Judgment Day. All right. And so over in Vayikra chapter 23, so let's just jump there. I will start in verse 23. And Yahweh spoke unto Moshe, saying, speak unto Bnei Israel, saying, in the 7th Chodesh, which is the same month that we just read about over in Vayikra chapter 16, in the 1st day of the Chodesh shall be a Shabbaton unto you, a Zichron Teruah, a memorial of blasting, a Mikra Kodesh, a set-apart calling out. Remember what God said when he said, I'm gonna judge the earth. It's called out to the earth. Mikra, kara, that's the same word, called out. Okay? You shall do no manner of regular work, and you shall bring a carbon of fire unto Yahweh. I taught this on the last 2 Shabbats, actually last Shabbat and a couple of Shabbats before that. Carbon of fire, carbon esh la Yahweh, that isha la Yahweh, esh esha. The word there is fire, but it's the same exact spelling of wife. So you shall you shall bring a wife of unto Yahweh, unto King Yahweh is the way that you could read that on a sort of a sod level there. And I wanted to bring that up because this ties into Jewish customs in temple times. I'm not talking about things that rabbis invented. I'm talking about temple customs, okay? That is Yom Teruah. Most people know it as Rosh Hashanah. Okay, the next verses we're going to read are about Yom Kippur. And Yahweh spoke unto Moshe, which we read about over in Vayikra chapter 16. So let me back up just a little bit, and then we'll come back to that. Chapter 16 was the details of the rites within the temple on just Yom Kippur, because it was the first Yom Kippur that they had a tabernacle. They had just finished making the tabernacle. They had reared it up about 9 days before. On the first of the first Chodesh, they reared the tabernacle, and then no, I'm sorry. They're 7 months into it. They're 6 months into it. And so they're in the 7th month. It's the first time, though, that they get to Yom Kippur when they have the tabernacle, and they anoint Aaron, and they go through the rites of Yom Kippur in detail over in chapter 16, whereas this is just saying the timing of Yom Kippur. All right, but it's important to understand because it's 10 days after Yom Teruah, and those 2 days are linked together. And they're linked together in a way that is all about judgment. And I'm going to get to that here in a minute. I had a chart of this and I couldn't find. I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. I'll have to either make another one or find it and post it here for you. But it says, and Yahweh spoke unto Moshe, saying, but on the 10th day of this 7th Chodesh, so we're in the same Chodesh as Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah. The 10th day is Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonements. And that's actually in the plural. You don't have to say it in the plural in English, but I just want you to know it's a magnitude of atonement. There are 2 atonements, multiple atonements that go on. The one for the tabernacle or the temple, the one for the altar, the one for the priests, and then the one for all the people. So it is multiple atonements, but it's one atonement in a sense. There shall be a Mikra Kodesh, so another calling out. Unto you, and you shall afflict your souls, and you shall bring a carbon of fire, same thing, a wife unto Yahweh. And you shall do no manner of work in that same day, for it is Yom HaKippurim, to make atonement for you before Yahweh your Elohim. For whatever soul there is that shall not be afflicted in that same day shall be cut off from his people. You shall do no manner of work. It is a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwellings. It shall be unto you a Shabbat, Shabbaton, and you shall afflict your souls in the 9th day of the Chodesh at evening. From evening to evening shall you keep your Shabbat. So there's several things that are brought out there, but we're talking about judgment. I don't want to get off on rabbit trails. But it is a Mikra Kodesh, and it is exactly, it's on the 10th day, and Yom Kippur, or Yom Teruah was on the first day, so there seems to be 8 days between them. The way you have to remember, and most people don't know this, is that Yom Teruah is 48 hours long. So it's technically 2 days, but it's 1 day. Okay, and that is to make certain that the Chodesh is seen, because this is the Chodesh, this is the month, this is the new moon for tracking time. So to keep the calendar from getting off, they have to make sure that they see that they affirm the Chodesh, that they affirm that the new moon has passed through the sky. Okay, so these days are tied together, and they always have been. And in temple times, what would happen is they would do their rites for Yom Teruah. which are very scarce. There's not a whole lot of description at all. Yom Teruah, I've said it before, is a chok. It's a mystery. The scriptures don't talk about it a whole lot at all. There's a few psalms that talk about it. There's very few references to it openly in the scriptures. So they're tied together, though. So in temple times, after those rites were done, after the Kohen, the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, would finish the rites, at evening time, he had to be ready. He and his wife. Remember, we talked about fire being also wife. He and his wife had to enter into a secret chamber within the temple to stay there for 7 days. Why 7 days? Because Yom Teruah was 48 hours long. So at the end of those 48 hours, he would go into and sequester himself with his wife into an inner chamber for 7 days to prepare for Yom Kippur. And this is what you have to understand. The Jewish people in temple times called Yom Teruah the judgment of Yom Teruah and the judgment of Yom Kippur. So it's one time of the year. It's one person being the judge. It's two groups of people being judged, but happening on 2 different days. So the judgment of Yom Teruah is for one group of people, and the judgment of Yom Kippur is for another group of people. And the sad thing is the ones that are judged on Yom Teruah are actually atoned for, and the ones that are judged on Yom Kippur in the temple times, they would have been atoned for if they walked all the way through the rites. But in the final judgment, the people who are judged on Yom Kippur have no atonement because they've lost their chance to confess their trust in the blood of Yeshua, which is our atonement. And so I've talked about a spiral many times in the past, of the spiral of time being, 1 year being a whole rotation through the spiral, and the feasts lining up on the same edge of the spiral of time. Passover and Yom Kippur line up almost completely over each other. And Yeshua took the cup on Passover and gave us our atonement, gave us our tzedakah, our righteousness, but the judgment of those who reject it is handed out on Yom Kippur. Okay, and so all of this that they practice in the temple for 2,000 years was rehearsal sessions for the judgment. Okay, and so that Kohen HaGadol would take his wife, and here's the thing, and a lot of people don't understand this, but he had to have another woman waiting outside the chamber with him, for him, I should say, who would, if his wife died in the chamber in the 7-day period, he could bring her in and still have a wife. Why they did that, I don't know, except for God. I'll tell you this: you can watch some of these. Some of them are actually pretty hard to watch. We had to bow out of one, but you can watch some of these TV shows about Orthodox Jews, and marriage is a huge part of their life. That's all they think about is marriage. For guy and girl, you got to be married. They start looking for your spouse when you're young, okay? Because in their mind, one of the greatest mitzvahs is to marry. It was the first thing that God said to mankind. Here's your wife. You're going to be one. You'll have no other. The two shall become one flesh. And so that idea was probably prevalent in the temple times. This guy can't be without a wife. God said it's not good for man to be alone. If he's in there, he's alone. It's not good for the high priest to be alone 5 days before the great judgment. Okay, so that's the concept, I believe, as to why he had to have a second wife waiting outside. So if his wife died, he had another one. He had a spare. But that's not. I'm making jest, but there is some symbolism in that, because I believe, and I teach, and maybe we'll see this as we get into the book of Revelation, that the bride of Messiah, and everybody is familiar with that concept, is not one lump sum group of people that meets him all at once. There's his intimate bride who goes up in a natsal on Yom Teruah, and then there's the rest of the bride that comes in after that 7 days. Okay, So I think that, and this is just Jewish custom. It's in what's called Mishnah. I think we might have talked about that last week. Mishnah is the writing down of the customs. It's not Torah, although our Jewish people treat it that way. We do not. It's not inspired writing, but what it does do is it gives us the history, and it gives us the concepts that they understood, and it gives us a lot of what's in the book of Revelation. It explains a lot of what's in the book of Revelation. So that Kohen HaGadol would come out for Yom Kippur, and that whole time, he's practicing to perform those rites that we read about over in Vayikra chapter 16. It's been a while since I've seen a comment. I want to affirm that I've still got you. I don't want to be blathering in front of a screen and it not working. So give me a thumbs up. Are you asking me something, dear?
Yes. That second wife, she a legal wife or just standby woman?
She's just there in case his wife died. She'd be legal if his wife died.
Okay.
She's not married to him yet.
Okay.
But if his wife died, then she would become his bride, yes. Hopefully everybody heard what Melanie's question was. I'm assuming you did. Okay, so it looks like we've got good communication still. Let's see where we were. So I do believe that Yom Kippur here is alluding to, and is certainly speaking about judgment. All right, I'm gonna slow down a little bit, Joe, because I noticed I've been going quite a bit. I know it's a lot to take. If you have questions, just ask. I'm gonna wet my whistle again. Yeah, attend to him, Betsy. It's probably part of it. Help him rehearse. He had to actually rehearse. There's language in the Mishnah about whether if he's a bungler, if he can't speak, then someone else has to speak for him. So it's if he's overcome by nerves, then thus and so has to happen. So this is a big day, is the point that I'm making, because Yom Kippur was the day of affliction, and of course we teach that is fasting, because the Mishnah confirms what the Bible also confirms. The Bible confirms that to afflict the soul is to fast. There are people out there in the Messianic community that are teaching that you don't have to fast on Yom Kippur. That's just a Jewish custom and you don't have to do it. Well, yes, it's a Jewish custom, but it's a biblical interpretation of to afflict the soul is to fast. And that's, I've written papers on that before. I'm pretty sure it's the book of Ezra. Yeah, that basically defines affliction of the soul as fasting. And so,
And it's the one commanded fast.
Yes, it is the only commanded fast, and that's important for one of the scriptures we're going to read here in a little bit. So he is spending 7 days preparing for Yom Kippur. Okay, and that has very, very messianic overtones. That has end time overtones to it that probably many of you are already going to in your minds. But before we do that, let's go to Yeshayahu chapter 26. We already went there in this discussion, I believe, last week. Now I'm going to remind you. So I've told you Yom Teruah is the judgment of Yom Teruah, and Yom Kippur is the judgment of Yom Kippur. Okay? Just as a reminder, Yeshua fulfilled the first 4 feasts. We're talking about the 5th and 6th feast of the 7 that are listed in Vayikra chapter 23. All right, so Yeshua fulfilled, just really quickly, most of you probably know this, he fulfilled Passover by being executed. He was buried on Matzot. He rose from the dead at the first Omer, and he sent the Ruach HaKodesh at Shavuot. Those are the first 4 feasts, and on a menorah, that gets us to the center branch of the menorah. The next one in line, and I believe Yeshua is fulfilling these things in order. That's what he did the first time, and the next one in line is Yom Teruah, the judgment of the righteous. So there's something else in the Mishnah about that, and that is that in order to bring the sacrifices for the judgment of Yom Teruah, the sheep were brought into a pen, and then they were counted. They were let out through a little gate, and a guy stood there with a staff in his hand and some tola'at, shani, some scarlet from that tola'at worm. And he would take that mop or that staff, that instrument, and dip it in that pot of scarlet ink, and he would count every 10th lamb. So what I want you to understand is this. I believe this is imagery about how small the number is that are marked to be righteous enough to go. And that is, not only do they trust in Yeshua, but they obey him and they show themselves as royalty in his kingdom right now. Okay, they're all sheep and they're all counted worthy. They were all, in order to be brought, just to be put in the pen, they had to go through the same evaluation criteria. They couldn't have any blemishes. They couldn't have any sickness. They couldn't have any scars or sores or anything like that. They all had to go through that. And then as they let them out, in order to pick the ones that were actually offered for the offerings, they would dab them with that red scarlet ink every 10th one. So that's 1/10 of the population was chosen to go. So I believe that's an allusion to how very narrow the path is in order to be part of what we call the remnant. Okay. The remnant is those who are alive and who are looking for his coming, those who are behaving themselves, those who don't do the things that they're not supposed to do. And so this would be, Daniel, where that might be some of the trepidation that you're feeling in these days, is you want to be counted worthy. Well, pray that you be counted worthy, and he is faithful. It's the people that are not praying to be counted worthy that have an issue. It's the people that are not tending to their own souls that have an issue. They may genuinely believe, but they're not looking for his coming. They have an issue. It doesn't mean they're going to go to hell. It means they're going to have to go through some stuff on earth, though. Yeshayahu chapter 26. And the reason I brought up the judgment of Yom Teruah or Rosh Hashanah and the judgment of Yom Kippur is because you see it in this chapter. And I think we did this last week, but I'm going to go ahead and do it again. Verse 2. Open the gates that the righteous nation that keeps faithfulness may enter in. This is similar to God calling out in the judgment and saying, let the Hasidim come to me, gathering his people, his Hasidim, his devout ones to it. The mind stayed on you, you keep in perfect shalom. We talked about that, and it stayed on him and is fixed on him. And for me, it's even narrowing down further than that, on the blood that he shed for me. You keep it in perfect shalom because it trusts in you. The mind that trusts in you is at perfect shalom. Trust in Yahweh forever, for in Yah is Yahweh, an everlasting rock. Look at that. In Yah is Yahweh, an everlasting rock. Inside of Yahweh is Yeshua. Right there in Isaiah 26. Okay? For he has brought down them that dwell on high, the lofty city laying it low. So what you're seeing here is the gates are open on Yom Teruah. We're talking about the gate in heaven. That's what's happening. Figuratively, it happened in Jerusalem, but eschatologically, it happens in heaven. The gate opens up, the righteous nation that keeps faithfulness may enter in. Not just righteous, but they keep faithfulness. They enter in, okay? And it's those who have their minds fixed on him, stayed on him, all right? And then all this chaos breaks out on earth, okay? Well, you have another allusion to it down in verse 16. We'll start there. Yahweh, in trouble have they sought you. Silently they poured out a prayer when your chastening was upon them. Like a woman with child that draws near the time of her delivery, is in pain and cries out in her pangs, so have we been at your presence, O Yahweh. We have been with child, we have been in pain, we have given birth to wind. We have not wrought any deliverance in the land, neither are the inhabitants of the world come to life. Your dead shall live, my dead body shall arise. Awake and sing, you that dwell in the dust, for your dew is as the dew of light, and the earth shall bring life to the shades. Bring to life the shades, that's right. Go, my people, into your chederim. So on Yom Teruah, go into your rooms, my people. Shut your doors about you. Hide yourself, just like that high priest does, for a little moment until the indignation passes. So that 7 days between Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur in ancient Judaism were always known and still are known in Judaism as the terrible days, the days of awe, the days of terror, the days of dread. Hide yourself for a little moment until the indignation passes. For behold, Yahweh comes forth out of his place to visit upon the inhabitants of the earth their iniquity, and the earth also shall disclose her blood and shall no more cover her slain. So the resurrection happens. The righteous ones go into the rooms and shut their doors. They're hidden for a moment until the indignation passes over. But down on earth, chapter 27 tells you, starting in verse 1, in that day Yahweh with his sore and great strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the slant serpent. And so that's what's going on earth for 7 years. That's the terrible days. Yeshaya, I'm not going to dwell on it. Yeshayahu chapter 27 describes the terrible days. Okay, so I've rattled a little bit more, and I saw some comments. Let me make sure. Okay, the Christian community loves to say they are guaranteed to be raptured because they are believers. Yeshua told his Talmudim to pray. They are counted worthy. They don't understand the remnant. That's entirely true, and that's kind of what I was talking about with those sheep. All of the sheep were clean. All of them qualified to be the offering on Yom Teruah. But not all of them were chosen. The symbolism is that they were chosen because of the blood. They were chosen because of that scarlet mark on their back, which is illusory to blood. Okay, and that is what it is. That's what you see over in Yeshayahu 26:2. Open the gates that the righteous nation that keeps faithfulness may enter in. And some people think in the Messianic community, I'm not giving them a pass either, because a lot of people think that just because they keep the Sabbath and they wear tzitzit, they put on little hats and they worship on the Sabbath, they think they're in like Flynn. And I've got news for them. They're not, because they don't do the more weightier things of the Torah. They don't understand the compassion of God. They go around judging people, condemning people. Let's use condemn. It's the same concept. They go around condemning people. They go around thinking that they're better than other people and holding them to a standard that they themselves can't keep. And that's hypocrisy of the worst kind. And so it's true of all religious people that they tend to get to a place where they're out of whack and their lamp is not trimmed. So it's the ones whose minds are fixed on him, and I believe ultimately on trusting in the blood alone for their salvation. Okay? And doing works because they love God, not because they're trying to make God like them more. You can't make a person like you more who has died for you. If that didn't convince you that he loves you, nothing else will. So God loves us. Yeshua loves us. And if he revealed himself to us, he has already expressed the most compassionate, abiding love that, he's not going to turn his back on me. And I've had to anchor myself in that, because many people have tried to show me that he's turned his back on me. They've told me that. I've had people literally tell me that. So, and they have no idea what they're talking about. So yeah, people don't understand the remnant, but I think that's not true only of Christians. I think it's true also of Messianic people. It's a very, very, very small number, that remnant. And let's go to talk about that, because I mentioned this. Of course, it was part of Shabbat, but we had a person who had made challah for the first time and followed the instructions of pulling out a piece of the dough and setting it aside. I wanted to understand what that was, and I explained it, but I didn't go into the depth of the explanation. That lump is called seor, which is leaven, because you're pulling out a lump of dough that has already been leavening, and you're going to use it to make your next lump of dough, which is leaven. But that word is seor, and seor is the same word as remnant. Okay, so look how small the remnant is. It's one little lump of the dough to make the next batch of dough. And that's what you see in pulling out a small group of people, and those people standing up in the worshiping in the throne room of Elohim and interacting with the earth in the sense of praying for the people that are down there, and then the wife being augmented at the end. Hopefully you see that. Did that come out okay here? Okay. Where are we? So go to Ezekiel 37, Yechezkel. This is a famous chapter, and a lot of people interpret it out of context, just like we do a lot of other things. And I don't want to dwell on it too much. I'll teach it at another time, perhaps. But I want you to see that it sets some timing here, similar to what we've already talked about. I'm trying to figure out where to start. I'm just going to start in verse 7, and understanding most of you have probably read this before. You can read it now. Verse 7 is echoing something that God told to Yechezkel. I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I prophesied, there was a noise, and behold, a commotion, and the bones came together, bone to its bone. And I beheld, and lo, there were sinews upon them. Sinews are muscles. And flesh came up, and skin covered them above, but there was no breath in them. Then he said unto me, prophesy unto Haruach. Prophesied Ben Adam, and say to Haruach, thus says Adonai Yahweh, come from the four winds, O Ruach, and breathe upon these slain, that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and Haruach came into them, and they lived, and stood up on their feet, an exceedingly great army. Then he said unto me, Ben Adam, these bones are the whole Beit Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are clean cut off. Therefore prophesy and say unto them, thus says Adonai Yahweh, behold, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves, O my people. And I will bring you into the land of Israel. And you shall know that I am Yahweh when I have opened your graves and caused you to come up out of your graves, O my people. And I will put my ruach in you, and you shall live. And I will place you in your own land. You shall know that I, Yahweh, have spoken and performed it, says Yahweh. Okay? I don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about that. I just wanted to read it to you and link it over to Yoel chapter 4, because I believe that's what Elohim is talking about there, is the valley of Yehoshaphat. Israel is going to be a witness of them getting their judgment for standing against God for so many years. But this is believing Israel. This is not just anybody willy-nilly who is in Israel. This is believing Israel. And so there's a great number of them. Even though the remnant is small compared to the bigger loaf of humanity, it's still a small number. It's a large number in the sense of a whole valley filled up, but in the sense of all the millions of people that have lived, billions of people that have lived over the years, relatively it's a small number. Incidentally, I did get in touch with the person who did that spreadsheet, and he sent it to me. I kind of figured he would have it, and he did. I haven't looked at it yet. But he did have the spreadsheet. What am I talking about? His calculations of the possible population of the earth before the flood, that 1,000-year period between Adam and Noah, how many people could have possibly lived. And it's in the billions. And so there are many souls that are going to rise from the dead one way or the other on one day or the other. Okay. So I told you we would go back to one of the scriptures that talks openly about the judgment. And we're going to do that right now. We're going to go to Yoel. This time we're going to go to chapter 2. Since I'm starting in 15, I think that might be before the King James and other versions move the verse numbers. So theoretically, chapter 2:15 should be good for all of us. Blast the shofar in Sion. Consecrate a fast. Call a solemn assembly. Gather the people, consecrate the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children and those that nurse at the breast. Let the bridegroom go forth from his cheder and the bride out of her chuppah. Let the Kohanim, the ministers of Yahweh, weep between the porch and the Mizbeach, and let them say, spare your people, O Yahweh, and give not your heritage to reproach, that the nations should make them a byword. Why should they say among the peoples, where is their Elohim? Then was Yahweh jealous for his land and had pity on his people. And Yahweh answered and said unto his people, behold, I will send you grain and wine and oil, and you shall be satisfied therewith. And I will no more make you a reproach among the nations, but I will remove far off from you the northern one, and will drive him into a land barren and desolate, with his face toward the eastern sea, and his hinder part toward the western sea, that his foulness may come up, and his ill savor may come up, because he has done great things. Fear not, O land, be glad and rejoice, for Yahweh has done great things. Be not afraid, you beasts of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness do spring, for the tree bears its fruit, the fig tree and the vine do yield their strength. Be glad then, O Bnei Zion, and rejoice in Yahweh your Elohim. where he gives you the former rain in just measure, and he causes to come down for you the rain, the former rain, and the latter rain at the first. And the floor shall be full of grain, and the vat shall overflow with choice wine and oil. And I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten, the cankerworm and the caterpillar and the palmer worm, my great army which I sent among you. And you shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and shall praise the name of Yahweh your Elohim, that has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never be ashamed, and you shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, that I am Yahweh your Elohim, and there is none else, and my people shall never be ashamed. So what you're seeing here, you might be saying, oh, that's the resurrection. Blast the shofar in Zion, consecrate a fast, call a solemn assembly. Gather the people, consecrate the country. It sounds a little bit like Yom Teruah, but when you read further, you find out it is, but it's not. Let the bridegroom go forth out of his cheder, and the bride out of her chuppah. So we have to remind you that there is the first shofar, the last shofar, and the great shofar. All right. And that's what you're seeing there is the great shofar.
Yom Kippur.
This is Yom Kippur. Because it's a fast. Afflict your soul. It's a fast. It's a solemn assembly. That's what God called Yom Kippur over in Vayikra. And so the bridegroom and his bride, which you see in these verses, went into the cheder at Yom Teruah. The high priest and his bride went into the secret room during those terrible days. So on Yom Kippur, the bridegroom and his bride come out of the cheder, the chuppah. This is why our Jewish people call that canopy of the wedding a chuppah. Okay, and that's why I like it so much in a Messianic wedding, is because it symbolizes us entering and coming out of the chuppah upstairs. And then, so this is a terrible day. Why? Because so many people are going to die on this day. So many people who are not atoned for are going to perish. And that's never anything to rejoice over. So what you're seeing here is this precedes what we saw in the Valley of Yehoshaphat, which happens shortly after this, if you will. In the interim, in between of that, for some reason, Elohim does it. He likes to make it tricky. It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to seek it out. I think that's Proverbs 30. In between that, he put the days that we're in right now, Yoel chapter 3, the passage that Kepha spoke from when he first declared the Besorah. Nonetheless, we have Yom Kippur going on here, and then you see he gets a little bit into the detail of the judgment at a later time in the book. So in the first century, did the Jewish people have all of this understanding? No, they did not. There was a lot of debate about judgment. Many of you know that the Tzedokim and the Peroshim, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, were two different groups. What a lot of people don't know is within the Pharisees, there were also two different groups, but they were all Pharisees. But there's some great distinction between the Tzedokim and the Peroshim, the Sadducees and Pharisees. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection and the judgment. The Sadducees did not. And so, but the Sadducees believed in keeping the feast the way God said to, but the Pharisees had moved them. And so the people were kind of caught in the middle. And they did a little bit of this and they did a little bit of that. And it just depended on who they were around as far as religious leaders as to what they did. So there was a lot of debate going on. And there wasn't a common understanding of the judgment. There wasn't a common understanding what it meant to be judged and what the criteria for judgment were. The Pharisees thought that the judgment was on every little tiny minutia thing that you did according to the Torah. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of people think in the Messianic realm, is they think that, every little tiny thing that you do, God is weighing it in the balance, okay? No, that's not how it works. Not for those who believe. For those who trust in Messiah Yeshua, for those who always, anytime, those who put their trust in Yah for salvation, and Yah has always been salvation from from Exodus chapter 3, Exodus chapter 15. There's multiple places that call Yah salvation. He's always been about salvation. It's always been about trust. Abraham trusted in Elohim and trusted in Yah, and it was counted as righteousness for him. So it's always been about that. But there was some debate about it in what the judgment was back in those days. And so you had people back then who actually did believe that when you died, you went to the bosom of Abraham. And that's why when Yeshua said that he was at the bosom of Abraham, and that they did you notice that they didn't balk? They didn't say, oh, sacrilege, it was a common understanding. And he told the guy hanging on the tree next to him, this day you will be with me in paradise. That's another word for the same place. Okay, so it is appointed for man once to die, and after that, the judgment. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get at here. Is judgment is tied to resurrection. It happens after the resurrection. And so in order to understand the details of it and how this plays out, how to interpret these scriptures, I think we've done a pretty good job of interpreting these scriptures so far, but we have to listen to what Yeshua said. Yeshua clears up the answers about these things. Okay, it didn't spark any controversy when he told the guy that the man who died was in Abraham's bosom and the other one was in Gehenna. It was almost like a non sequitur. It was almost like it didn't cause a bubble at all. It was just everybody accepted it and they listened to his story. The Tzaddokim did not believe in life after death. They didn't believe in the resurrection. And then there were some people who believed in reincarnation. And Yeshua put that to bed. Yeshua is the one who answers all our questions about life and death and judgment. Okay, and Yeshua spoke quite a bit about judgment, and Yeshua warned about hell more than he lured us with heaven. He warned us about hell more than he did, and I get in trouble for that. I warn people about hell, and I warn people about judgment, and at the same time, I do talk about the beauty of heaven and the glory that we can find here on this earth by living. By entering into the Hall up above. I talk about it quite a bit, but Yeshua talked about judgment quite a bit. He tried to warn people, and that was 2,000 years ago. Some people teach, and this was brought up last week, and I'm not surprised, some people teach, especially in the Messianic community, that when people die, they just lie there. And some people call it soul sleep. I'm not going to be able to get into all the details of that because I'm running out of time. I might actually finish tonight. It's possible. But I did want to address it tonight. They misinterpret Old Testament passages in order to come to those conclusions. And one of the first ones that they do is gathered to his people, Abraham in Bereshit chapter 25, verse 17. Let me go there and read it for you. I think it's verse 17. Yeah. No, that was Ishmael. Yeah, there's another place. I wrote down the wrong scripture reference for Abraham. There is a place where Abraham dies, and it says he was gathered to his people. So Abraham was gathered to his people. In, I don't remember what chapter, 35, I want to say, Isaac was gathered to his people. Verse 29 of whatever chapter it is, I didn't write it down, but it says, and Yitzchak expired and died and was gathered unto his people, old and full of days. All right, so what am I getting at? People say that gathered to his people means that he was put in the grave because that's where the people were. Okay, I disagree. And one of the reasons is this verse that I just read, and I wish I had written properly down the references. It says, Yitzchak expired, this is Isaac, and died, and was gathered unto his people, full of old and full of days. And then the next sentence says, and Esav and Yaakov, his sons, buried him. So he was gathered to his people before he was buried. Right? Yeah. Okay. In Bereshit chapter 35, let me get there. Verse 18 is where Rachel dies. Because another way that they frame this is they say that because the scriptures say in multiple places, he who sleeps in the dust. And so they take these two passages and they say that it's soul sleep, that people die and their soul goes to sleep, and that's all that happens when you die. There is no going to heaven when you die. And there's not a going to heaven in the sense of harps and angels and all that kind of stuff. There's a going to Abraham's bosom. Okay, there's going to, which is the center court of the temple that's upstairs. But there's another building in there that we don't go into. Okay, so and then those who are not to be resurrected to righteousness, they go to another place, and Yeshua makes this very clear, and we're going to read that here in a little bit.
Yeah, Lazarus.
Chapter 35, I want to show you this. Where did it go? Hopefully I wrote down the right verse. Let me set the tone. I'm in chapter 35. I'm going to start in verse 16. This is, before we start reading, this is where Yaakov is returning from the land of the Chaldees, the land of Lavan, his uncle. He's returning from there with his 2 wives and their 11 children. And Rachel is pregnant, and Yaakov predicted her death, although he didn't know that's what he was doing. He pronounced her death, and she dies on the way. And so in verse, where did I say we were going to start? Verse 16, and they journeyed from Beit El, and there was still some way to come to Ephratah. Ephratah is another name for Bethlehem. And Rachel bore a child, and she had hard labor. And it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, Fear not, for this also is a son for you. And it came to pass, as her soul was in departing. Her soul didn't stay with her body. Before she died, her soul was already tearing away from her body. And as her soul was in departing, in her death, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Binyamin. So Yaakov may not have even heard Rachel say Ben-Oni. That might just be something between God and us. Are you with me? Because her soul was departing when she said it. Okay, but the point is that her soul is being separated. Where is it going? It's being gathered to her people. Okay? So you have to understand that, and then the scriptures that they take about sleeping primarily is all the kings. So in 1 Kings and 2 Kings, and also in 1 Chronicles and 2 Chronicles, anytime a king dies, almost every king, I couldn't find one where it didn't say this of one of the kings of Israel. When he died, it says, and he slept with his fathers, he slept with his fathers, he slept with his fathers, he slept with his fathers. And that doesn't mean that he was buried with them. As a matter of fact, in Genesis 49, Yaakov, whose name is Israel, he's dying. Let's go there and read that. It's in chapter 49, Bereshit, Genesis chapter 49, because this, I think, is a linchpin in this argument, or one of the linchpins in this argument. Chapter 49, verse 30-something. Yeah, let's start in verse 29. And he charged them, the sons of Israel, and said to them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite for a possession for a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah, his wife. There they buried Yitzchak and Rivka, his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is therein. Okay, verse 33. And when Yaakov made an end of charging his sons, he gathered his feet into the bed and expired and was gathered unto his people. And what people don't realize is it took 30 some odd more days to bury him. He was gathered to his people in this verse. Yeah. And then they had to embalm him because they were in Egypt. They weren't over there by these graves. So he was gathered to his people, and 6 weeks later or more, I can't remember that. I think it might have been 2 months. It was a long time. They had to embalm him because he would have rotted on the way and stunk and been full of disease. And they couldn't, they had to break the Torah and embalm this guy in order to get him buried where he wanted to be buried. And he was already gathered to his people. So it's a misnomer. It's a writing into the text what is not there when you say that gathering to his people means simply to be put in a hole in the ground. That's not what it's talking about at all. And so there's always been a hope of resurrection, and there's always been the notion that we go to Abraham's bosom in paradise when we die. And just because Christians believe it doesn't mean it's wrong.
So there's two examples, right? Yeshua didn't want to call Lazarus from the grave.
Well, we're going to get to that.
And then Lazarus and the rich man.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the concept of soul sleep is it's taking something that is poetic language and making it literal, and you cannot do that. When it says that we sleep in the dust, it simply means that our body ceases to function. And yeah, it falls to sleep. And that's what Yeshua said of the girl that was dead. She's not dead, she's only sleeping. Okay? Because he knew that he could bring her back. Okay? And my wife just brought up Lazarus, who was in the grave for 4 days, and Yeshua wept because he had to call him back from that place. And I do believe that's why he wept. He's got to, here's a man who's in paradise. And, okay, I got to prove to these people that I'm the Messiah. Hate to do this to you. Come back. Lazarus, come forth. So the sleeping in those verses is a poetic thing. It's just a euphemistic way to say that he's dead. Okay. And so in Luke chapter 16, verse 19, and this to me proves, and this is Yeshua being sort of the linchpin of this thing. He says in verse 19, there was a rich man who used to wear purple and fine linen, and every day he made merry very lavishly. In other words, he lived his life in luxury. And there was a poor man named Eleazar who was laid down at the rich man's door, afflicted with boils. He longed to fill his stomach with crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. The dogs also came and licked his boils. Now it happened that the poor man died. Now what I want you to understand is this was a scene that seems to have been common in Israel in Yeshua's day. So this was, for us, that's kind of freaky. And, we have very little experiences like that. The closest I come to it is the homeless when I worked down in Houston last year, and all the homeless would gather at the little Methodist church and collect, take a free meal every morning at about 10 o'clock. And some of them were unkempt and not clean, but none of them had boils, and none of them were just longing for the crumbs that fell off a rich man's table. They were longing for a meal. You know what I'm saying? But this was common in Israel. And it says in 22, now it happened that the poor man died, and the malachim, the messengers, carried him into Abraham's bosom. You can't get any more clear than that. This is Yeshua speaking, and he didn't say, let me tell you a parable. I'm telling you a parable. He didn't say that. Listen to the parable of the sower. Listen to the parable of this. Listen to the parable. No, he's just saying it is as a matter of fact. And these people have names. He never, ever once assigned names to the characters in parables. Okay? These people have names. This is history here. Now, the poor man died. He went to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And while he was tormented in Sheol, he lifted up his eyes from a distance and saw Abraham with Eleazar in his bosom. And he called in a loud voice, saying, "Oh, my father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Eleazar to dip his finger in water and wet my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame." And Abraham said to him, "My son, remember, you received your pleasures when you were living, and Eleazar his hardships, and behold, he is comfortable here, and you are suffering. Besides all these things, a great gulf is fixed between us and you, so that those who wish to cross over from here to you cannot, neither from there to cross over to us." And he said to him, "If that is so, I beseech you, O my father, to send him to my father's house." And so he goes on and asks him to save the people, save his living relatives. Have Abraham send someone to save his living relatives. That's basically the gist of it. And Abraham says, even if they will not hear Moshe and the Nevi'im, even if a man rises from the dead, they will not believe in him. And Yeshua was dead on with that one. Abraham was dead on with that one. Even if a man rises from the dead, even if Yeshua rises from the dead, the Jewish people are not going to believe it. Okay? So I personally believe that this is the linchpin, that you can't get around this. You can't say this is parable or allegory or anything like that. This is a very literal story. And it makes it very plain. And what a lot of people don't realize is that Sheol and Gehinnom, the two words that were used for what most people call Hades or hell, which I don't use those words anymore. They're not entirely bad. They just invoke other imagery like Dante's Inferno and stuff like that. But Gehinnom was a valley, and so that's alluding to the gulf that is fixed between. And so there was this valley where they would sacrifice babies and throw their bodies headlong into that valley, dash them against the rocks. It was horrible stuff going on in the worship of Moloch and stuff like that. And that's what this is comparing Sheol to, and the gulf that is fixed between. And some people think that the valley that it's talking about is right there on the south side of Jerusalem. I don't tend to think so. I think it's somewhere else. I just forgot where. Nonetheless, hopefully I still have you with me. We've got a few minutes left. I think it's very literal that we die first, we wait in one place or the other, we're resurrected from the dead. And I believe the book of Revelation makes that very clear when we read about it last week when we talked about resurrection of the dead, that the second death is for those who are condemned. Okay, they are resurrected from the dead, and then they die a second death, which is eternal death, eternal torment, perpetually. Okay, so Yeshua clears up other things about the judgment. And we're running out of time here, but I think I'm gonna, is everybody there? Is anybody there? Am I talking to the screen or am I talking to people? I guess if I'm just talking to the screen, maybe I can finish because it says I'm still recording. So Yeshua, I already said that Yeshua talks about judgment quite a bit. And the first place I'm going to go is Matthew chapter 7. I'm going to do these a little bit quickly because we're running out of time. Verse 21, and this is a very familiar passage, but I want to clarify some things in it. Verse 21, 7:21. It is not everyone who merely says to me, my Adon, my master, Lord, Lord, who will enter into Malchut HaShamayim, the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of Avi Shebashamayim, my Father who is in heaven. A great many will say to me in that day, and that day we've already talked about, it's Yom Kippur Judgment Day, my Adon, or Yom Teruah. This is on Yom Kippur because it's the judgment of the wicked. My Adon, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out devils, and in your name do many wonders? Then will I declare to them, I have never known you. Keep away from me, O you that work iniquity. Okay? I have never known you. Keep away from me, O you that work iniquity. So there's a lot of people going around bragging about the fact that they know Yeshua, but they don't understand that Yeshua doesn't know them. And we are known by our works. We are known by what we do, and most importantly, how we treat people, and secondarily, how we obey God and how we do what He tells us to do. So he goes on to say, whoever hears, and this is proving what I just said, whoever hears these words of mine and does them, he is like a wise man who built his house upon a rock. I don't have to read all of that, but what I wanted to show you is, many will say to me in that day, there are a lot of people who profess to believe in God, who profess to believe in Jesus, who profess to believe in whatever name he goes by in their language, and who follow some sort of religious rite and think in all of their heart, and who even do miracles in his name, and think in all of their heart they're going to be okay in the judgment. And the mere fact of it is that they're not. And it's those that work iniquity. That phrase, O you who work iniquity, is Qohelet Chapter, Qohelet Chapter. I won't try to spell it in Hebrew because I'll probably get it wrong. Qohelet Chapter, workers of iniquity. That is, if you study the Psalms, that is basically another term for a Torah breaker, one who breaks the Torah. That phrase is basically defined as breaking Torah. Okay, and so again, yes, there is. I worry far less about Christians who don't keep the Sabbath than I do about Messianics who are mean and hateful and judgmental and cruel. There's a lot of Christians going to be better off than a lot of Messianics in that sense. Another place that Yeshua talked about judgment, and what we're establishing here is that Yeshua is the judge. Okay, Matthew chapter 13. I'm going to start in verse 40. Therefore, just as the tares are picked out and burned in the fire, so shall it be at the end of the world. Ben Ha'adam will send his malachim, and they will pick out from his malchut all things which cause stumbling and all workers of iniquity. There it is again. And will throw them into the furnace of fire. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the tzaddikim shall shine as the sun in malchut of Avihem. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. And this really goes on all the way to verse 50. I don't want to read all of it. Let me scan it and see if there's anything. Verse 49, so will it be at the end of the world. The malachim will go out and separate the evil from among the righteous, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's sort of judgment day. That's the verdict is in, and they're wicked, and their punishment, because they are condemned, their punishment is being cast into this lake of fire. And we read about that last week, talking about the second death. They are raised from the dead and thrown into the lake of fire at that point. So that's at the end of the end. That's at the end of the 1,000 years. Okay. Really quickly, chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. I'll just start in verse 26. You should probably go back to 24 on your own time and read it. For how will a man be benefited if he should gain the whole world and lose his own nefesh? Nefesh is soul. Or what shall a man give in exchange for his nefesh? For Ben Ha'adam will come in the kavod of his father with his malachim hakedoshim, and then he will reward each man according to his works. Truly I say to you, there are men who stand here who will not taste death until they see Ben Ha'adam coming in his malchut. Okay? And so it's Yeshua returning with his messengers, and he will reward each man according to his work. So the point here is that Yeshua is the judge. Okay, I'm going to give you references. I was going to read them, but we're running out of time. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1 and 8 also establishes that Yeshua is the judge. So does Romans chapter 2, verse 2. And you could really read all the way through 16. But what I wanted to show you there is that it says that Yeshua is the judge, but it also says in Romans 2 that we, the human beings, are judged by the Torah. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that we keep the Torah. Again, is to affirm our trust in the blood of Messiah, to demonstrate that we believe in Elohim. We're not just playing a game here. Matthew, we read. Luca has very similar scriptures because it's called a synoptic gospel because it's written very similarly. So I'm not going to read all of those, but I want you to make a note and go read chapter 12, verses 2 through 5, because it says there that they are cast into Sheol. I will show you of whom to be afraid. Be afraid of him who has the power to throw into Gehenna. Yes, I say to you, fear him. So this is just talking about fearing God and being cast into Gehenna, which is the lake of fire. Yochanan 12 says that the judgment happens on the last day. That's Yom Kippur. That's the seventh millennium. So judgment. So let's kind of recap here. The judgment is Yom Teruah. That's the beginning of the seventh millennium. The judgment of the righteous happens on that day. That's the very few who have the testimony of Yeshua and follow the Torah and do it rightly. That's a very few people. That judgment happens. 7 earth years pass, and on Yom Kippur, at the end of the 7 years, Yeshua returns. And we talked about this last week. He sends those people in their soulish form into the pit. And then at the end of the 1,000 years, which is what we just read about over in Matthew, and you can read about here in Luke as well. At the end of the 1,000 years, that's when Yeshua sends messengers to collect those who rebel and who sin during that 1,000 years, and to raise everybody from the dead who rejected him, and then send them into the lake of fire. That's what the final judgment does, and that happens at the end of the end. Okay, and so Romans 14:10 says very plainly that, let me just go read that. And this kind of goes to what I mentioned just tongue-in-cheek a few moments ago. But what I'm trying to point out is that every human being, and we've already pointed it out, is that every human being is going to stand before God in judgment in one way or another. In verse 10 in 14, it says, "Why then do you judge your brother, or why do you despise your brother? For we must all stand before the judgment seat of Mashiach." And so what's going on here, in Romans chapter 14 is messianic people getting at each other's throats because they disagree on things. And Shaul is saying, who are you to condemn your brother, judge your brother? You're going to stand before the seat of God as well. Every human being is. And so I think this is a basic element of our faith and I think it's one that few people learn, and that's you better be merciful, because the judgment of God is terrifying, and you find yourself on the other side of it when you're sitting in that seat yourself. Any questions? Is anybody still with me? Oh, I say she is. Any final thoughts or questions? Managed to get done.
Praise Abba and Yeshua.
Bueller. Are you there? Well, I was going to try to wait until I got some feedback. Hey, there we go. No questions. Lots of homework. Yep, you better get after it. You'll be graded. You're not graded on the curve. All right, shalom, shalom. It was good to see all of your fingers typing. I will post a post about because we have completed this study. I will post a post about what we're going to do next. And I've thought about, and this is for future people who might watch this after the live session, of giving you a certificate of completion of some kind, just so that if you want it for some, I don't know why most of you would want it, but just get with me if you think that's something you want to talk about. Is it on earth or spiritual realm? Is what, Carolina? I don't understand your question there.
I haven't. Probably around.
Yeah, maybe so. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to wait a little bit and see if Carolina heard me. Well, I don't see a comment, so I will check back after I save the video. So shalom, shalom, lehitraot. See you next week. Shalom.